Hi, my name is Eric Brockbank, and in this video I'll present some recent work with Toby Gerstenberg, Judy Fan, and Robert Hawkins at the Stanford Social Interaction Lab. In this project, we're interested in how people get to know others. And in particular, we're asking why some questions seem to enable that process more than others. For example, asking how was your day might tell you less about somebody than what's your greatest fear. So here, I'll walk through results from 2 experiments we ran that explored this question in complementary ways. So in the first, we explored people's evaluations of different questions with respect to whether they help us get to know others. And in the second experiment, we look at people's answers to a subset of the questions from experiment 1. And here, we're asking whether people's answers contain information about what they're like. So I'll walk through each experiment briefly, but feel free to email or come find me at the conference if you have any questions. So we began by developing a corpus of 235 open-ended questions from prior research and collaborators. Around half were meant to be representative of small talk, so questions like, do you have a favorite sports team? The other half were meant to be more personal and disclosive, such as, what's the most difficult decision you ever made? So online participants were shown a subset of these questions and asked to rate each one on 9 sliding scales. These scales all probed aspects of the question related to whether it would help you get to know somebody. So for example, how personal it was, how much you'd expect to learn about someone from their answer. So I want to highlight 2 key findings from our results. First, we ran a factor analysis to see how much people's evaluations of the questions hang together across each of the 9 scales. So in the figure on the right, we're plotting the factor loadings for the 9 scales on the first 3 factors, as well as the variance explained by those factors. What we see is that the first factor explains around 83% of the variance in people's ratings, and that all 9 scales load pretty heavily onto that first factor. So there's some interesting patterns in the second and third factors, but our main takeaway here is that evaluations of the questions can largely be collapsed onto a single latent scale. We might think of this as something like the question's interpersonal depth. So second, we want to know how consistent a question's interpersonal depth is across different raters. So here I'm showing individual subjects' evaluations of several small talk and personal questions plotted on that interpersonal depth dimension from our factor analysis. And this shows that questions vary in their consistency, but people provide reliable evaluations at both the high and low end of this scale. So what this gives us is a way to estimate for a given question how much people consider it a deep interpersonal question and how much they agree in their judgments. So in experiment 2, we examined people's answers to a subset of these questions. So we begin by selecting a small set of targeted questions based on their interpersonal depth and consistency from experiment 1. We ask a set of online participants to answer 3 of the targeted small talk questions and 3 of the targeted personal questions each. Alongside this, they filled out 60 sliding scale questions probing aspects of their personality, including the 44-item Big 5 personality inventory. So our goal here is to explore the relationship between their written responses to these targeted questions and aspects of what they're like surfaced by the personality scale questions. So we presented each of the original 188 participants' free response answers to a separate batch of 482 participants. So we had between 2 and 5 participants in this new batch who saw each of the original participants' free response answers. So first, we asked the new participants to evaluate how much they thought the original respondents' answers would help them get to know that person. Here, we're showing these evaluations for each of these questions, colored by their original designation as either small talk or a personal question. And we can see that the value of the responses for getting to know others recovers the original perceived depth of the questions. So next, we ask those same 482 people to make predictions about the original respondents' answers to the sliding scale personality questions based on their free response answers. So in the plots below, we're showing the predictive accuracy for each of the 60 scales, with human predictions on the left and GPT-4o predictions on the right. The larger blue dots in these figures indicate the average for a particular scale's original response on X and the average for the predictions of that scale on Y, with the smaller dots indicating the variability of the individual predictions. So in separate analyses where we shuffle the predictions and the original responses, we find that the accuracy in these figures arises at least in part from making person-specific predictions. So we're continuing to analyze these predictions at a more fine-grained level to try and understand how people succeed and fail at these person-specific inferences about others. In future work, we're hoping to further explore the inferential processes that allow us to learn individual models of others, especially in naturalistic dialogue settings. So stay tuned, and thanks for stopping by. Take a look at our proceedings paper for more details, and please don't hesitate to reach out with any questions.